Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement. Now, as I consider the current headlines happening here in America, I can't help but to remember a parable that Jesus presented to his disciples. It's actually in Luke chapter 6. There, the Lord rhetorically asks, "Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into the ditch?" Now, I realize that this question, it could be triggering to those who are fighting for the rights of the disabled, and yet I'm going to guess that most blind people would agree that a blind tour guide is going to struggle with their assignment, and especially if they're in charge of leading a group of blind people. Now, as for the rhetorical question that Jesus presented, the whole point of the parable was a perfect illustration of the difficulties that arise whenever leaders who really can't see how their decisions affect others are then leading those who really don't know where we're headed. And this certainly seems to be the situation here in the United States of America. The blind are leading the blind, and we're headed, nationally speaking, for a proverbial ditch. A case in point, let's consider a new study which was recently published in the renowned British scientific journal Nature. This study, which is titled Risk Assessment of Retinal Vascular Occlusion After COVID-19 Vaccination, this study, it helps us to see that the overall risk of retinal vascular occlusion was significantly higher for those who have received the COVID vaccine. As a matter of fact, this new study has revealed that people who have received those experimental injections, they were up to 3.5 times more likely to suffer from visual impairment than those who are unvaccinated. Now, the authors of this study have assured us that vaccine-related retinal vascular occlusion is very rare, and yet I'm fairly certain that none of these recipients who now suffer from this condition were clearly forewarned about the possibility of this adverse reaction. Now, this study is further supported by another study which was published on the NIH's National Library of Medicine. And in this study, which is titled Ocular Complications Following Vaccination for COVID-19, a one-year retrospective, in this study, we find a long list of ocular and retinal adverse events that have been reported by those who received the COVID-19 vaccine. This includes corneal melting, graft rejection, acute retinal necrosis, and many other conditions that I can't pronounce. And in the concluding remarks of this study, the authors declared this, and I quote them, "Since the introduction of COVID-19 vaccinations, numerous reports have commented on adverse ocular events following vaccination." Or in other words, there appears to be a connection between the COVID vaccines and the adverse ocular events that occurred shortly after the injection. Not only that, but they also warned us by declaring this, and I quote them again, "It is our belief that caution and delay may be warranted in lower risk groups with active complications." In other words, those who belong to low risk groups like healthy kids and youth and healthy young adults, well, they should probably reconsider this injection, especially in light of the fact that it could result in possible blindness. Sadly, the warnings of these scientists have been ignored by the blind leaders who keep pushing this so-called vaccine on our kids. For example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Clinton Health Access Initiative, they're both now working together with the World Health Organization in order to promote a new vaccine initiative, which is better known as the Big Catch-Up. Well, in a recent tweet, Chelsea Clinton, who's representing the Clinton Health Access Initiative, she endorsed this new vaccine initiative by assuring us that vaccines save lives. That's what she tweeted. Vaccines save lives. That's right, this is the same gal who just told us that removing pornography from public school libraries will somehow harm students who suffer from gender dysphoria. And this despite the fact that minors are always negatively affected by pornography. Not only that, but listen, the kids who read these books will also then be harmed if they travel down the dark path of gender-affirming care. Oh, don't take my word for it. No, instead, I would draw your attention to a 2021 study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine. This study, which is titled Mental Health Care Utilization of Transgender Youth Before and After Affirming Treatment. This study, it helps us to see that there is no improvement in mental health for those who receive hormone interventions. And not only that, but the same study has also shown an increase in prescriptions for psychotropic medication after hormonal interventions were initiated. Now, I can't help but to wonder here, why would those who receive this gender-affirming care need more psychotropic medications after receiving their gender-affirming treatments? Well, the reason why is because this issue is psychological and not physical. But I digress. When it comes to Chelsea Clinton and other leaders like her, well, I would suggest that we don't take advice regarding the health of our children from blind leaders who think that our public school libraries ought to provide our kids with LGBTQIA plus pornography. These people are clearly blind leaders of the blind. At the same time, I wouldn't receive healthcare advice from leaders who believe that abortion is healthcare. Please trust me when I tell you that the political leaders and the medical professionals who refer to abortion as healthcare, they're either lying to you because they know better, or they've actually been deceived into believing that abortion is some sort of healthcare. And listen, those who believe that abortion is reproductive justice, well, they're willing to call for the death penalty of a person whose only crime was to inconvenience their mother through the conception that they didn't cause. Now, with all this in mind, I have a hard time receiving medical advice from anyone who thinks that abortion is health care. And while this might sound like a genetic fallacy, it's actually a logical position which is just as rational as the person who thinks that a blind individual isn't the best choice for leading other blind people. Sadly, our nation is being run by blind leaders who are leading our nation into the proverbial ditch. And further proof of my point can be found in the fact that the National Institutes of Health, or in other words, the NIH for short, the NIH just decided to reinstate a federal grant to EcoHealth Alliance for the sake of studying the risk of bat coronaviruses and all these sorts of things. Now remember, EcoHealth Alliance is a New York-based nonprofit organization that received millions of tax dollars from Dr. Fauci, in order to engage in their research, which included the study of bat coronaviruses there in Wuhan, China. That being the case, we shouldn't be surprised to learn that many ended up being convinced that this federal funding was used by EcoHealth Alliance to engage in the gain-of-function research that resulted in the COVID-19 pandemic, which has claimed the lives of nearly 7 million people worldwide. Well, now that the Department of Energy and the FBI have both confessed that the coronavirus most likely came from a laboratory, well, you would think that EcoHealth Alliance, the group that was engaging in a study of bat coronaviruses in the same Chinese city where the pandemic began, those guys, well, you would think that they would be under investigation right now for their possible involvement in the creation of COVID-19. Nope. They're receiving more of our money. They're receiving more of our money from the federal government so that they can continue to play with highly pathogenic and infectious agents. Clearly, the blind are leading the blind. Meanwhile, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has warned us that America's power grid is in big trouble. And here's how Commissioner Christie put it, and I quote, "I'm really afraid to say that I think that the United States is heading for a very catastrophic situation in terms of reliability. Hope it doesn't happen, but I think we're heading for potentially catastrophic consequences." Okay, so the Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner is concerned about our energy grid, and as a result, he's warning us about the potential for catastrophic consequences. And here's how he put it as he continues here, and I quote, "The core of the problem is actually very simple. We are retiring dispatchable generating sources at a pace and in an amount that is far too fast and far too great, and it is threatening our ability to keep the lights on." That's right. The leaders who have embraced the green energy cult, they're creating a catastrophic situation that could result in the possible complete shutdown of our electric grid. And without debate, the blind are leading the blind. The blind are leading the blind, and it's sad to say that this is occurring across the board and even spiritually speaking. The blind here in our nation are being led by blind spiritual leaders as more and more people embrace a religious faith that cannot save them. It's for this reason that born-again believers, we must become those beacons of light so that we can help those who are dwelling in darkness to find their way to the light of the Lord Jesus Christ. And with this as the goal, we must stop following these blind leaders before we also end up in the proverbial ditch. Instead, let's walk in the light of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we do this by proclaiming the gospel message in this lost and dying world. And as we do this, well, the Lord Jesus will help us to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.